So you don't believe that there is a God? You think that we all project this into reality?
First, you'd have to give me a good definition of what you mean by God. Whether I can agree with that or not, I don't know. I'd have to hear that definition. In terms of a celestial or transcendent God, which is not immanent in the universe, but is instead beyond what we conceive of as physical reality, I think that lies also in those ideas of Kant that there is a noumenal world, a thing in itself, which our consciousness is unable to assess and which is ineffable. And if you want to call that God, I'm fine with that. But I think that our consciousness itself is part of that physical construct, and that our current scientific interpretations of what time and space are again reflections of how our own higher mind creates our consciousness, and that time and space as we perceive them don't actually exist, that things in the past don't actually pass away, that everything is coextant, as Parmenides said, and that we exist in a series of different worlds that our consciousness is a part of. And our consciousness operates on three separate aspects which form like databases, and those are our memories, our sensual cognition of the present, and our premonitions of the future. And that it's very important that those three databases be as accurate as possible.
Welcome to the One-on-One Podcast with your host, Juan Ayala.
And I guess we could just introduce ourselves, because it's going on your channel and it's on my channel. I'm Juan from the One-on-One Podcast. And
I am Christopher John Bjerknes from cjbbooks.com.
And today we're gonna be talking about some heretical stuff. Today you can find me at the One-on-One Podcast on any social media platform, YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, all that good stuff. And we're going to get heretical today. Very heretical. We know that the educational system, the religious system, everything is not what they have told us. And I know Christopher really goes hard in the paint when it comes to some of these heretical ideas that are not, it's not new on my show, so I don't mind getting a little bit controversial. But just a heads up, right? Because some people, they identify with whatever religion that they are in, and which is fine, right? Because I do believe that religion serves its purpose as far as giving somebody a structure, giving somebody a purpose. So at its core, the 10 Commandments, don't be a piece of crap, right? Be a good person. Don't kill anybody. That's fine, right? As long as you don't hurt yourself or others, I'm good. Leave the kids out of the whole stuff that's going on in the world, and you can worship Cthulhu for all I care, or Golem Jesus. So who cares, right? But just a heads up that we are going to get very heretical, and we're going to go deep. So
perhaps worse than heretical, we're going to be blasphemous, and we are going to explode many religious mythologies that have been built up. And if you are a religious person, if you're a religious person with an open mind, I think you'll be grateful to be exposed to this information, which will give you new insights. These insights may even increase your faith, but please keep an open mind, vet all the sources I refer to, and judge for yourself.
it's funny how that works, right? Sources, how it always goes back to one guy, but then I always wonder, where did that guy get it, right?
Oh yeah, there's nothing new under the sun. You can go back to Pythagoras, and then he was taught by an Egyptian priest. And where did the Egyptians learn it from? And then there's also this other aspect to that so many cultures seem to have the same origin myths.
Mm-hmm.
So it may be an aspect of human nature, which has been in us for hundreds of thousands of years.
For those,
it may be the rational conclusion that human beings draw when they experience their environment and observe nature.
Before we get too deep into it, Christopher, where can people on my end find you, your work? Where can they go to find you if they want to read your books? I know you have numerous books published. And you also have a publishing company, if I'm correct?
They're self-published. It's through cjbbooks.com. In there, you'll find a description of all my books in print. Not all of my books are still in print. Many have been censored and never republished. I also have a YouTube channel, CJB Books, which you can find by going to YouTube and searching for CJB Books. And I have a Twitter account of the same name.
Awesome. And I just want to plug one more thing. I did start a little, I called it a zine at first, but it's more of a, I want to call it a journal, the Occultist Monday. And it's various I wrote about the homunculus in this one, but we have various people writing in it. Mark from my family thinks I'm crazy, Paranoid American, Slick Dissident, and Homie Romy from Rising from the Ashes. And it's the Armchair Occultists Reader Digest, I guess you could call it that. But yeah, you can find that on my website, the101podcast.com. And yeah, it's jam-packed of occult stuff, and I think I'm going to keep it going. But I started as a zine at first, but I guess you could consider it a zine. But I think it's more serious. It's more scholarly, you know what I mean? So I didn't like the whole zine thing, so I switched it up and calling it a journal. Now it's inspired by, you ever heard of Manly P. Hall's All-Seeing Eye?
Yes.
Yeah, it's something like that. Obviously not as hard in the paint as Daddy Manly P. Hall, but something of a revival, I guess you could call it. But you can find that on my
means
website.
The occult world, right?
Yeah, the hidden world, the Occultist Monday, the hidden
or
world.
The secret world. Yeah.
The secret world, yeah. So I did this just because I think that, especially what we're about to get into today, it's got to do with the occult. And these individuals, the ones that I like to call the reptilian overlords, and if they're actually lizards or not, it is what it is. But the archons, the dark forces at work, whatever is trying to hold you back, that's what I refer to as these people, right? And these people, they speak in code. They speak in symbols. Symbols are the language of the soul. So what I want to do is help people identify maybe occult symbology or bring forward some new esoteric knowledge that they don't know about. You know what I mean? Like, just bring awareness and not let it die. Because as my hat says, make esoterica great again, right? A lot of people are, how you're saying some people they censored your books. That's crazy, right? Words.
Yes.
Whatever happened to sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Whatever happened to that?
They do believe that words can hurt them because exposing the truth exposes their agenda, and they don't want people to be aware of it. Because in order to make rational decisions with your conscious mind, as opposed to being programmed in your subconscious mind in an almost quasi-hypnotic state, your consciousness needs to rely on factual understandings of the past, present, and future. And what I try to do is provide that factual information so that people can arrive at rational decisions as opposed to emotional decisions, and simply not follow what they've been told, but instead be able to determine for themselves what is true.
I come from a background I was Pentecostal Christian. I still identify with, I believe in a God, but how you're saying, I don't subscribe to the mainstream narrative of whatever they say is God, right? I do believe that there is a source. There has to be a source. And you mentioned Pythagoras earlier. I think that he was right by saying all is number. And by saying all is number, maybe he's hinting at binary code. Maybe it is some sort of simulation. If there's a simulation, there's got to be a programmer or some sort of architect. And how you're saying, a lot of these ancient religions, they all have a similar creation story. Do you think that's part of maybe the human psyche trying to make up for something? Or do you believe that there is something more than meets the eye, that there actually might be some creator being, maybe not Abraxas, maybe Cthulhu and friends, maybe? Where do you stand with that?
I think a big part of what you're describing is that the mind reflects upon itself and comes to understand the processes by which it has assembled its images of nature and existence. And the mind evidently operates with number, and number implies measurement. And most scientific procedures involve measurements in space and time. And the mind tries to orient itself within the noumenal world, as Kant called it, through its phenomenological experiences. And that since our human minds are very similar amongst us, at least for most people, we arrive at similar conclusions. And the fundamental precept of science is that like conditions produce like results. So when human beings existing on the earth assess their position in the universe, they look at how they regenerate themselves through procreation. They observe the fact that the sun and the moon revolve around the earth in a cycle of darkness and light. It tends to arrive at similar conclusions as to how the chaotic world becomes animated into the form of life, and as to how the human mind is differentiated from the lower animals, and therefore human beings arrive at the conclusion that there was some higher mind than our own minds, which generated creation and gave some kind of order to this chaotic world in the form of animated and souled beings, human beings being among those. And then there's also this human nature of being in social groups and having parents and having children. And we tended to create our gods in that image, that we had some kind of paternal and maternal influences which guide us and can protect us or can destroy us. So I think it's very much self-reflective and reflective of our nature in our environment that tends to generate similar conclusions, true or false, as to our origins, our purpose, and our destiny.
So you don't believe that there is a God? You think that we all project this into reality?
First, you'd have to give me a good definition of what you mean by God. Whether I can agree with that or not, I don't know. I'd have to hear that definition. In terms of a celestial or transcendent God, which is not immanent in the universe, but is instead beyond what we conceive of as physical reality, I think that lies also in those ideas of Kant that there is a noumenal world, a thing in itself, which our consciousness is unable to assess and which is ineffable. And if you want to call that God, I'm fine with that. But I think that our consciousness itself is part of that physical construct, and that our current scientific interpretations of what time and space are again reflections of how our own higher mind creates our consciousness. Mm-hmm. And that time and space as we perceive them don't actually exist, that things in the past don't actually pass away, that everything is coextant, as Parmenides said, and that we exist in a series of different worlds that our consciousness is a part of. And our consciousness operates on three separate aspects which form like databases. And those are our memories, our sensual cognition of the present, and our premonitions of the future. And that it's very important that those three databases be as accurate as possible, which is why I've written my books, to provide human consciousness with an accurate interpretation of the past, an accurate understanding of our present conditions, and therefore a more rational set of premonitions and expectations of the future.
You're spitting some black belt stuff right now, Christopher. You're going deep already, and I'm trying to keep up with you. Let's talk about the Gnostics, right? Let's work our way. I want to talk about the Gnostics because you do have Abraxas behind you, and then we can pave our way into the whole Jesus being Golem, homunculus, whatever it is, and then we can go from there. But what are your thoughts on the Gnostics and what they're, because you're talking about this Akashic records, right? This global consciousness almost. Am I correct in saying that, where you're able to, because absolutely, we don't understand time itself. It's a man-made thing, Scaligerian chronology. He was a Catholic priest or a Jesuit priest or something like that, and he came up with it. I think that it's all bullshit, right? It's all a man-made system in order to entrap us. How the Gnostics were saying that this flesh shell thing is a prison for the soul, right? That was their whole thing, to transcend to the next, the upper eons, and we were stuck in the lower eons. And obviously the most heretical or blasphemous thing that the Gnostics are talking about is that the Satan archetype, the devil archetype, Yaldabaoth, created the material world. And I said that one time to a Christian, and they almost had a seizure. They were like, "Do you worship Satan?" And I'm like, "No, dude, I am simply telling you a story of creation." What are your thoughts on the Gnostics and their whole cosmology and their worldview, if you will?
That's a great question. What the Gnostics did was pursue the oral tradition of Judaism as opposed to the written tradition of the Tanakh, and specifically the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And they revealed the fact that the Israelites always hated that evil God Yahweh, who is Yaldabaoth, the creator. What the Platonics, the Middle Platonics at the time that Gnosticism evolved, said was that the demiurge was an emanation from the monad or the one, because the monad wanted to preserve its unity in order to create a differentiated universe which was distant from itself. It needed to create a creator God. And that creator God was called the demiurge, which is Greek for the craftsman or the artisan who creates. That demiurge was an androgyne. It had both a male and a female aspect to it. And the male aspect was actually the creator. It then emanated its female aspect, which the Neoplatonists called the world soul, which is also found in Plato's original works.
Is that the nous? Is that what they called it?
The nous is the mind.
The cosmic mind.
Yes, that is within the demiurge. But the first intellect, the highest mind, is within the monad. And there were different branches of Platonism which broke off from that. But in the standard Neoplatonistic view, which is what inspired Kabbalah and was developed at the same time as Gnosticism in a very parallel way, the demiurge is the logos, which is the divine set of principles, effectively the male seed, which establishes order in the moist earth of chaos, that moisture being the seminal fluid itself, which is also perceived of as light. So it is perceived that the universe is the night, Nyx, which is the chaotic womb, which is the material world. And that material world is in chaos. It is the most distant aspect from the one. It is infinitely particular. It can be subdivided infinitely as opposed to the divine perfection of the unity of the monad or the one. And what the demiurge does is it emits its light. The concept of the demiurge derives from the Orphic god Phanes, Protogenous, Lightbringer, first begotten, who is the child of Ananka, his mother, and Kronos, eternal time, his father. He is created as a silver cosmic egg by Kronos and Ananka, and that cosmic egg explodes in a big bang of light. And the light is the seminal fluid, the seed that commingles in the womb of night, Nyx, which is represented as a serpent that entwines about the cosmic egg. And those two things create the universe. And that is why I said that all of this is reflective of what human beings perceived of their own existence, that the male places his seed into the womb of the female, which is a dark, warm, moist place, and that then gives birth to an ordered creation that has an intellect and a soul. And this is the concept of the Trinity on a individual level. Everyone has a mind, body, and soul. And that all gets into Kabbalah. We probably won't get too deeply into that today. But I just wanted to give evidence and an example of the fact that all of these things are derived from our empirical understanding of our own generation as human beings generated from our parents. They believe that the universe was generated from its parents. And it also related to the idea that each new dawn is a recreation of the universe. This was the Egyptian conception of the light emerging on the horizon to commingle with the darkness and to fertilize the seed in the moist earth. All of this relates to the idea of the man putting his seed into the woman and her nurturing that seed to create human beings that have an intellect and a soul. And human beings always perceive themselves as having a much higher order, a state of order over chaos and being rational, as opposed to chaos, which is irrational and stupid.
It's funny how that works, right? Where it always goes back to that sperm to the seed, right? And what are your thoughts on you ever heard of Joseph Lumpkin?
Joseph Lumpkin.
Yeah.
I'm sure I've heard the name before, but I can't place it.
I've done a couple episodes with him, and he's written a few books, and he's translated the Book of Enoch, and he's got a few publications.
The Book of Enoch was very significant work.
I recently did an episode with him where we talked about the evolution of religion, because we're talking fairly recent events, right? If you want to follow the timeline that they're giving us, because we can talk about that, but fairly recent events, 2,000 years from now, do you believe that religion will be what we have it as today? Or do you think that it's going to evolve? Because we talked about the evolution of it, and Dr. Lumpkin said that he believes that there's going to be a new axial age, that there's going to be a new age where people are going to awaken, and there's going to be these new, I don't know if it's going to be the AI messiahs or the metaverse messiahs. I don't know what it's going to be, but that it's going to change, because I don't see it holding up 2,000 years from now. I mean, it's got to change. There's going to be some crazy discovery at one point or something where they're going to have
It's the crucial experiment that explodes all of our mythologies. An experimental crisis is what it's called, that forces human beings to reorient their beliefs in a new direction. It's very interesting that you frame this in a 2,000-year framework, because that matches the zodiacal ages. And I have researched the idea that the Genesis story, the 6 days, relates to 1,000-year periods, millennium, and that forms a 6,000-year cycle broken down into the 2,000 years of the zodiac, from Taurus to Aries to Pisces. And we're now on the verge of entering the age of Aquarius, and that will be the next 2,000-year period. And the Kabbalists try to break that down, and so do the Christians, into either a millennial period, a 1,000-year period, or a 2,000-year period. In terms of the direction that we are headed, it depends who wins and triumphs in the current battle for existence that we face.
his story. It's his story for a reason.
Right. And as you initially framed it, that we are up against people who are the forces of darkness. Those people have the inverted conception that we are the forces of darkness, and that we have to be eliminated so that the light can fill the vacuum in God that God created, and then filled with light into vessels of material, of matter, that shattered and created the darkness which enshrouds the light. And they believe that the universe has to be cleansed of those dark vessels, which are broken into shards that they refer to as shells or husks or kelipot, that are like oyster shells that conceal the divine sparks, which are like pearls.
So we're just shells to them?
We're worse than that. We are what they call the evil inclination. We referred to this vaguely before. The darkness itself is seen as a universal force of chaos, which is the evil serpent. And there are two forms of light. There is the light of darkness and the light of day. And those are separated in the story of Genesis. And in most occult traditions, they're viewed as Abraxas's legs, the evil serpent and the good serpent. But they are one in the same serpent, and they have to be combined. And the cosmic process, as understood by those who want to eliminate us, is that the chaos gradually assimilates and absorbs the light of day, which increases its own strength. And at the end of the cycle, it has completely absorbed all of that light, and the darkness shines. And then all of the dark shells have been eliminated through a process that they refer to as rectification. And that process of rectification is removing those evil shells of the Kalipat. Now, the evil inclination is referred to as the other side, the Sitra Achra. And the specific word for evil inclination is Yetzer Hara. And all of this can be seen on a macrocosmic level as how the process of the universe unfolds. But the human being is viewed as a microcosm of that macrocosm. So the human being also has two forces within him or her, and they have the good inclination and the evil inclination. And this derives from the Platonic notion of the charioteer, who is pulled to the heavens by a white horse and by a black horse. The black horse represents the body, the corpse of flesh of the Gnostics, that continually draws the soul back to the material world, where it wants food, where it wants sex, where it wants to live forever, and where it wants to procreate. But the white horse of the charioteer is the soul trying to return to its source, its transcendental source of the light which first emanated its divine spark. And in Kabbalah, this is pursued as an ascent back up the Sephirot to the original source of the light. But all of this has very, very ancient roots, as Simo Parpola proved in his article, The Assyrian Tree of Life, tracing the origins of Jewish monotheism and Greek philosophy. And he spoke about the Akkadian and earlier belief in the Tree of Life, which had an eagle on top of it and a serpent at the base. And this reappears in Gnosticism in the Apocryphon of John, where they are also confronted with the eagle and the serpent in the Tree of Life. And these are symbols of the ascent back to the gods. The eagle represents the ascent, because the individual in the story flies on the eagle so that his soul returns to the gods. But the serpent is constantly tempting humanity with the needs of its body to have sex, to enjoy treasure, to pursue food. And the Neoplatonists were the primary school that latched onto this, as well as the Gnostics at about exactly the same time, and they criticized one another. But they both centered belief on being the release of the soul from the corpse of flesh so that it could return to its source. But I believe that that was initiated as a trap for Christians so that they would give up the material world and leave it in the hands of the Israelites, and that the Romans could be eliminated with this trap, because by embracing Satan as their God, Jesus Christ is Satan in Gnosticism, they have abandoned all of their supernatural protection and their pagan gods. And the other mistake that they made in Orthodox Christianity was to recognize Yahweh, Yaltabaoth, as their primary God. But what the Gnostics revealed was the oral tradition belief that Yaltabaoth, Yahweh, is actually an evil force, a malevolent force, a misanthropic force that, like the gods of the Sumerians and the Akkadians, resented humanity for being too noisy and wanted to kill us all. And so what they did was they exchanged gods with the Romans and the Greeks. And they gave the Romans and the Greeks Yaldabaoth and Satan in the form of Jesus Christ and Yahweh. And they themselves adopted Neoplatonism in the form of Kabbalah and Proto-Kabbalah, which was essentially Gnosticism if you reverse it back into Judaism. Because Gnosticism is Judaism turned on its head. Yahweh becomes the evil force, Yaldabaoth, and Satan becomes the good force, Jesus Christ.
Can we pause there real quick, Christopher?
Yes.
Because you mentioned Jesus serving a purpose, right? You said destroy the Romans, and
He's a golem. He's sent as a force of chaos to destroy the Romans. I apologize for interrupting.
No, you're good. I just want to pause it there before we go any further, because that'll segue us into the next thing. Obviously, there's a bunch of places where we can go, but I want to solidify this idea because the Bogomils, the Cathars, they all believe that the Old Testament was a work of demons, right? That was their whole thing. And
absolutely, yes. And that creation is bad, and that children should be aborted, that semen and menstrual waste should be consumed as divine essence,
as Eucharist.
And essentially, that human beings should be. We can get into I have some novel insights into the Eucharist, but that human beings should be eliminated because it was evil to trap souls in the material world.
I have a few.
Monad, the one, was complete unity, and therefore the ego had to be sacrificed. The self had to be sacrificed to the one through the death of the ego, which is death itself. So they duped the Romans into believing in this Platonistic conception that the material world is evil and that they had to return to the world of ideal forms. And so that they committed collective suicide. And the Roman Catholic Church recognized this to an extent and slaughtered the Cathars so that they didn't slaughter all Europeans.
Well, okay, you just back up, Christopher, because you just said some crazy shit just now. So you said that they duped the Romans into believing that they needed to go on to the next realm. So can you break that down again? Slow it down a little bit, because it's pretty crazy.
You're picking up on it, man. You're getting it.
Are they killing themselves, or what are they doing? Because
they're failing to have children was the initial plan. That they viewed sexuality as evil.
It was genocide.
They viewed, absolutely, that was the plan. But that plan goes way back. In the Old Testament, you have the battle between the descendants of Eve and the serpent, who was Cain, and you had the serpent's curse, where the serpent's head would be crushed, and he would strike the heel of the descendants of Eve through Adam, which were Seth. So you had that cosmic war of extermination between these two forces, which are reframed as the sons of light and the sons of darkness in the Qumran, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in the War Scroll. All of that goes back to the initial mythology that Cain was the child of Eve and the serpent, and therefore has that dual nature. And the curse is put upon them to be at war with one another, and is repeated in the story of the twins, Esau and Jacob. And Jacob tricks Esau into surrendering his blessings, which is his soul, to Jacob, because Esau is the firstborn child. The firstborn is primordial chaos, and it has the highest soul of Tohu. Vavohu.
And that's why it's sacrificed, right? That's why they sacrificed the firstborn.
That's what I've been writing in my book. It was sacrificed to Moloch, so that soul would then enter the body of the secondborn. And then it is the firstborn who receives the double inheritance. And they believe that this cosmic cycle of this first 6,000 years of Taurus, Aries, Pisces will end, and that cycle is the present world, Olam Hazeh. At the end of that cycle, chaos triumphs and creates a new world, Olam Haba, which is the world to come. For that to happen, all of the firstborn have to be sacrificed to Moloch and give up their soul, Yechida Mashiach, the soul of the evil serpent, the soul of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ himself gives up his soul to his twin, Messiah, son of David. Jesus is Messiah, son of Joseph. So Jesus, the reason that Jesus has to die in the story is so that his soul, Yechida Mashiach, is released and can enter the body of Messiah, son of Joseph. Again, we have this trinity of mind, body, and soul. Messiah, son of David, is the vessel. Messiah, son of Joseph, is the soul. So he has to die, and then the evil serpent and the good serpent, the serpent of light and the serpent of darkness, can commingle in the king of the Israelites, who is Messiah, son of David.
And who was the son of David?
Well, we don't know. They have named various people. The most significant in the history of Kabbalah was a man named Shabbatai Tzevi, who declared.
Why does that
himself,
name sound familiar to me? Is somebody worships that guy, right? Because I've heard that name before. Is that Zoroastrian or something?
No, it's much later. He declared himself to be Messiah, son of David, in 1666, which was the year that the Zohar predicted that the Messiah, son of David, would arrive. And he was led by his mentor, Nathan of Gaza, to appear as Messiah, son of David. And he had a tremendous following among Jews around the world. And he got into trouble with the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, because when the Messiah, son of David, arrives, the Jews are supposed to be restored to Palestine. And the Sultan didn't want that to happen. So he put Shabbatai Tzevi on trial, and Shabbatai Tzevi pretended to convert to Islam and formed a cult within Islam known as the Dernmeh.
It's the one, the inversion guys, where they do everything just completely transgress. I've heard of this before, yeah.
That's the doctrine of redemption through sin, where they invert.
Which is what the lizard people like to do. This is what so they achieve divinity through transgression, through all these fucked up things that we hear about. This is what I believe that all these guys, Crowley, Parsons, all the greatest occultists were doing, right? I mean, this is...
Now you got it. And that the reason they do that is because Yahweh was a son of a bitch. He hated humanity. And his book was the map of creation, but it is not the map of the world to come. So all that Yahweh's book is telling is for the first 6,000 years of creation, in which the enemies of the Israelites, which is everyone else, has to be eliminated. Once that is complete, Yahweh becomes irrelevant and the Torah becomes irrelevant. So in fact, to bring that about, the Shabbataians believe that they have to reverse the Torah and spit on the name of Yahweh. And it is simply a repetition of what the Gnostics did. They spit on the name of Yahweh, and they celebrated Satan in the form of Jesus Christ. In this Kabbalistic belief system, Satan is the guardian angel and the progenitor of the non-Israelites. And they have the higher soul of the firstborn, because the Gentile world existed before the Israelite world. The nations existed first. So they have to be sacrificed to Molech, and their souls have to be released and then be absorbed and assimilated by Jacob, who are the Israelites, who then mix the darkness and the light, and the darkness shines. And that's why there's an 8th candle on the menorah, to celebrate the world to come when the darkness will shine.
And Joseph is also the literal definition of motherfucker, because he was supposedly the stepdad, right? He was the my buddy breaks it down that he was the Lord, so he rules with an iron fist. And this is all really...
Joseph was hated by his brothers for that fact, that he had this dream that he would rule over them. But the greater significance of Joseph is that he ruled the world from behind Pharaoh's throne in the same way that Christ ruled the world from behind the throne of Rome. So that's why he's referred to as the Messiah, son of Joseph, because he repeats that process of ruling the entire world from behind the throne of the greatest non-Israelite empire on earth.
Interesting.
Messiah, son of David, will rule the entire world from Jerusalem, from Zion, and he will be able to do that because the non-Israelite world will have been eliminated from existence. So that is why we have the distinction of Messiah, son of Joseph, and Messiah, son
Is that
of
the
David.
144 number, the 144,000 number?
144,000 number is from the book of Revelations, and it relates to 144,000 Jewish virgin men who will be the remnant that helps to restore the Jewish people after the final judgment.
Interesting. I wanted to bring up right now that we're talking about the Gnostics and we're going deep. One of my favorite excerpts from the Nag Hammadi, the Gospel of Judas, where the disciples said to Jesus, "Tell us how our end will be." Jesus said, "Since you have discovered the beginning, why do you seek the end? For where the beginning is, there will the end be. Blessed is he who shall stand at the beginning, in the beginning, and he shall know the end and shall not taste death." The Gnostic Jesus was very poetic. He was really, they put a lot of beautiful words in his mouth. And I want to go and talk about this. I want to fortify the idea that this Jesus character and Christ is a title, right? Jesus Christ is the man under the possession of the Christ consciousness, right? That's the way I learned about it.
The soul,
yeah. When he was baptized in the river of Jordan by John the Baptist, right, which we can get into that, they believe that he was. That's why the Mandeans and what's the other ones? The Manichaeans, is that how you say it? The ones that
yes.
that revere.
But that's later.
Yes, but that's why they believe that baptism is like this extra thing, and they revered John the Baptist as the true Messiah. But this idea that he was out of this world, in the Gospel of Judas acknowledges that Jesus is from the immortal realm of Barbelo. And in that book, in that text, which is crazy, right? The disciple, the Judas is the good guy in that story, this is why I think a lot of this stuff is bullshit, because if you go to its core, if you really go and look at religion, how you mentioned earlier, they think we're the bad guys. We think they're the bad guys. So we're just going back and forth. Nothing is being done, right? Nothing is being done because at the end of the day, we're going to still continue. I don't hate anybody, right? But there are some religions where you are literally indoctrinated to hate. I remember when in Sunday class, they would tell us about how other religions, Islam, Hinduism, whatever, other religions, they were going to go to hell and they were going to burn for eternity because they weren't following our way. I'm like, why? But who said our way was the correct way? You know, who said that? What, a whole bunch of guys who won wars and pushed an idea and indoctrinated millions of people throughout history? They were fighting, there were schisms over what bread that they were using at the Eucharist. They were fighting over how to handle the bread for the Eucharist. Those are the guys.
Thought about the idea that the bread becomes poop.
Yes.
And therefore Jesus is turned into poop.
They are arguing about this stuff. They didn't even know about what they were doing. So in this story, Jesus takes them aside and he tells Judas that he needs to turn him in to free him from this physical realm, from this world. So Judas is the good guy. Jesus confides in Judas in the Gospel of Judas, and the disciples hate Jesus. They say that they despise him. And it's my favorite because there's a line in there where Jesus disappears and then the disciples are like, "Hey, where'd you go?" And he's like, pretty much like, "Hey, I went to another dimension because I can't deal with you guys right now. So I was literally in another he said, "I'm in another time enjoying myself pretty much, and I came back here because you guys are dragging me down. And it says that the disciples they despised Jesus, and that Judas was the good guy. And there's another version where Judas kisses Jesus because he needed to be identified before he could shapeshift. So you have the shapeshifting Jesus story as well. But they don't want you to read these things. I remember bringing up the Nag Hammadi Library, the Dead Sea Scrolls, to people in church, and they're like, "Hey, you know what? Don't read that. Don't look into that." I was like, "Hey, but why in the Old Testament? Why does it reference Enoch? What's going on here? Where's Enoch?" Well, it's not a canonical book in our canon, but it's a canonical book in the Ethiopian Bible and all this. I was like, "So why is that?" You know what? Actually, disregard the Old Testament. I was like, "What are you talking about?" You know, I had family members tell me this.
Priests say that.
Yeah, I've had family tell me, "Hey, just disregard the Old Testament altogether." I go, what? So it's okay to nitpick and choose what you want to occult and what you want to have exoteric and all this stuff. And then when you start to question it, you become a problem. You become an issue. You know, I remember 12 years old reading the book of Revelation, and my grandma telling me that they were going to cut my head off if I didn't accept Jesus, right? When the rapture came, if I didn't accept Jesus in time, if I would have stayed in the whole 7 years and all this stuff going on, the first 3 were going to be great. Then the second half was going to be, and then the last half was going to be horrible, right? And the plagues and all. Yeah, I remember all this stuff. I was a 12-year-old kid learning about this. That's traumatizing. It's
child abuse.
100%. But when
it dehumanizes you, it makes you hate yourself. That's all of the conditioning that Christianity does, is to make you hate yourself and embrace the idea that you're evil and therefore you should be destroyed, and that he who comes to destroy you is your salvation. And that is, in the Kabbalists acknowledge the fact that Jesus returns as the Antichrist to slaughter all the Christians. There's a lot to unpack in what you said. You talked about Jesus being the beginning and the end, and in the book of Revelation, he is called the Alpha and the Omega. That relates to the Golem. The word inscribed on the Golem's forehead is Emet, which begins with the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph, the middle letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Mem, and ends with the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Tav. It has always been acknowledged that when Jesus called himself the Alpha and the Omega, he was calling himself the Aleph and the Tav. And that proves that Jesus himself was a golem. The purpose of the golem is to be a monster created out of chaos. Jesus was created by the succubus Lilith and placed in the womb of Mary to become the golem, to destroy the Roman Empire. The golem is made dead by erasing the letter Aleph, the beginning, so that the end ceases to exist, which forms the word Met, which is the Hebrew word for dead. So all of these are cryptically revealing to the fellow Kabbalists that Jesus is a golem who's created out of the muck of clay to become a monster to destroy those who worship him. The Gospel of Judas is the book that makes that crystal clear, together with the Apocalypse of Abraham. In the Apocalypse of Abraham, Satan kisses and worships Jesus because Jesus is his son. But ultimately, at the end of the 6,000-year period, both Satan and Yahweh have to be killed so that the Israelites themselves become the gods who govern chaos. Just as the alchemist creates the homunculi, the Kabbalists will create 600,000 androgynous immortal beings who will then be the gods of the universe. Their will provide whatever order it wants to chaos. In the Gospel of Judas, Jesus also instructs Judas that the 12 disciples are in fact deceivers who lead the Christians, who are likened to cattle, to the slaughter on the altar. So when Jesus talks about, as it was in the beginning, so it's going to be in the end, he is referring to the triumph of Jacob over Esau and the fact that he, Jesus, will be the force through his deceivers, the apostles, who will deceive Christians into believing in him, abandon their own supernatural protection through their own gods, which created them, and come to believe that Satan is their guardian angel who will protect them. Satan betrays them on the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. He flips from being the accuser of the Israelites to being their advocate. And Jesus repeats that cycle and becomes the Antichrist who imposes the final judgment on the non-Israelite world and sentences them to extermination in the final judgment. Christians were led to build up this world empire. The Roman Empire was taught to destroy all the pagan gods. Jesus is actually the Egyptian demon Shezmu. Shezmu was a god who trampled the winepress, which meant steps on the heads of the gods and of human beings and extracts their blood. And this mythology is repeated in Isaiah chapter 63 and Revelation chapter 19. And Jesus is that God who kills all the other gods and feeds their blood to his master god in the Egyptian myths, Unas, in the Hebrew myths, Yahweh. So the process that is being taken place is, again, this demon god Shezmu extracts the soul as blood. In Judaism, blood is the seat of the soul, which is why kosher prohibits eating blood, because you'll absorb the souls of animals, and prohibits eating unclean animals because you'll absorb their unclean souls.
And blood is also one of the one of the most powerful offerings, right? You could give to a demon or something, because that's the life force, right? That's the
absolutely
the
in
essence.
the original rites, it was the blood that was offered, and then in the Egyptian rites, that became symbolized by wine. Wine represents blood, which is the Eucharist.
So
Now,
before you go any further, Christopher, because you're going on, and you're a black belt in this. We know it. So I wanna ask you a couple questions that I've been wondering about. So we have the idea of the homunculus. We have the idea of Jesus being the golem, right? And there's various stories of the golem. The one that I like the most is the Rabbi Judai Low in Prague, 16th century, where he makes the golem to protect the Jewish ghettos, et cetera, et cetera. So a golem is more of like a robotic AI program to do one thing. It doesn't speak. It's imperfect. It obeys.
It's supposed to obey.
It obeys, right?
But it eventually becomes a monster, which becomes disobedient, and the monster becomes the master, and it has to be killed by erasing the Aleph.
Like Frankenstein's monsters.
Christians are the slaves who initially build the empire, teach everyone to embrace the idea that a Jewish king will rule the world from Zion. And once that has been accomplished at the end of the age of Pisces, the Aleph has to be erased, and Jesus and the Christians have to be killed by their own forces.
Interesting how that works. So
and before Rabbi Lerv in Prague, there was Elijah Baal Shem of Chelm. And it's in that original story where you get this idea of erasing the Aleph and killing the golem by destroying the word Emet and changing
he forgets one night. Whoops, I forgot to turn the golem off that night, and he just killed everybody. So this idea of Jesus being the golem, right, and later on becoming Frankenstein's monster, where he tells Frankenstein, he's like, hey, I'm gonna see you at your wedding night. And he ends up killing everybody that he loves, right? It's the monster that he created, etc. How you're saying eventually you have to kill it. The homunculus, it serves a purpose, right? So it's a man created for magic, and referencing the Liber Vitae.
May I interrupt with a very important insight on that point?
Yeah.
In traditional Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, the angels have no will of their own. They are completely obedient to God, and they only serve a singular purpose. There are angels who perform justice. There are angels who make people fall in love. But the conception of the angel is a being who is completely obedient to God, has no free will, and who serves a singular role.
So are they golems?
Now, they're the prototype of golems, because the rabbis in Sanhedrin Folio 65b, the rabbis say that they are the same as God, and just as God can create worlds, they can create worlds. And since the world is the macrocosm, the worlds that rabbis can create is the microcosm of the golem, which is the same process as the creation of Adam out of clay, and providing breath into Adam. So they are also replicating the idea that God created the angels as his forces, so they are going to create the golems as their forces.
Interesting. Wow. Okay. I did not know that. That's really interesting. It's like that would explain Metatron, right? Metatron becomes this gatekeeper, this overwatcher of reality, right? Enoch, I believe that's what they're holding. I believe that's at the core what the occult, the esoteric and exoteric knowledge, where if Enoch, after he was shown the secrets, right? After he was able to look behind the veil, he became this great angel, Metatron, right? He transformed, and I think that's what they're holding us back from, where if you do learn the secrets, if you do transcend all the degrees, whatever it may be on these secret societies, whatever. It might be a pyramid scheme at the end of the day, but I do think that there is a little mustard seed somewhere in there where it's not just complete bullshit. But I do think that's what they hold us back from when it comes to this occulted knowledge. They want to hold us back from being able to transcend and becoming essentially our own gods or whatever it may be. I'm not 100%, but what I wanted to ask you was this idea that...
Can I address what you said? Because it's very insightful and very important.
Yeah.
Yes, Enoch and Elijah were the ones who ascended to heaven. The concept of the Sephirotic tree is that the Hasid ascends up through in the exact opposite order of the emanations of light. The emanations of light first emanated into Keter, which is Metatron, which is Adam Kadmon, and then they emanate from there to fill the descending vessels as emanations. In Neoplatonism, the opposite of emanation is epistrophe, which is ascent. It is the eagle as opposed to the serpent. And the rabbis believe that a righteous person, a tzaddik, the righteous are the Sakidim, that person can ascend. And then you reach this point just below the upper three Sephirot, where you have what's called the dark night of the soul. In the Platonic system, which is derived from the Mithraic system, the soul ascends across the seven spheres of the seven heavens upon the seven planets. Islam also adopted this mythology. So the soul has to ascend the lower seven Sephirot, and it then reaches the dark abyss of the stars, and it has to cross that point. At that point, it is tempted by the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, to return back to the material worlds of the lower seven heavens and the earth. And they say, stay on the earth, you can have sex, you can have food, you can keep your body alive and immortal. The good inclination and the good angels encourage what are called the righteous. The righteous are the tzaddik and the tzaddikim, and they are encouraged to continue their journey. And if they cross over that great abyss, which Plato called the Great Divide, into the higher realm of the gods beyond the stars, they can then become what are called prophets, like the prophet Elijah and like Enoch.
Ascended masters.
You can call them the masters if you want. They are referred to as prophets and as the righteous among the rabbis. And they get to see the map of the Torah, which is written in the 22 letters of Hebrew, which inscribes the divine words which manufacture creation. Because in Genesis it said, God said, let there be light. So it is speaking this divine language which generates creation. And because creation is a map, these divine prophets, these righteous beings, get to look at that map. And some of them simply disappear into that heavenly world, and some of them return to the earth as prophets.
Okay, so you said a lot of really great stuff there. I'm going to ask my original question because I know we can go a whole bunch of places with this. This is great. I think this is what these guys like Crowley and all them, what crossing of the abyss, they were obsessed with that because how you mentioned at the very beginning, it's all about destroying the ego, leaving the ego behind. So
it's all about the ascent back to the gods. It's called the Lectio Divina in Catholicism. It's called the Unio Mystica in Neoplatonism, the mystical reunion with the One, which first emanated the divine sparks of our soul.
Is that what the bridal chamber was about
goal
for the Gnostics?
The bridal chamber is about reuniting the male and the female into an androgyne.
So the homunculus.
No, not necessarily. Adam is created in the image of the gods. That's one of the first things that the Bible says in Genesis. Those gods are Yahweh and Shekhinah. The Godhead is also an androgyne. It is male and female. Mm-hmm. And it only became divided in a catastrophe when Adam believed that it was only female, that it was Shekhinah or Asherah, as the Canaanites called her. And Yahweh became angry because the male aspect of the God was not recognized by Adam when Adam was created. That caused a split, a division in the Godhead into its male aspect, Yahweh, and its female aspect, Shekhinah. Likewise, Satan, the evil Godhead, was also an androgyne. And when that happened, Satan got divided into his male aspect, Samael, and his female aspect, Lilith. Now, Adam was created in the image of the gods, male and female. He had to be cut in half to create Adam and Eve. So Eve is actually Adam and is viewed that way in the oral tradition of Judaism. They are one being, but they are the male aspect of that being and the female aspect of that being. In the temple, the original temple of Solomon, there was a bedchamber where Yahweh and Shekhinah would have sex every night, and that would keep the world joyful and happy. That bedchamber was destroyed when the temple was destroyed. Shekhinah became very resentful when that happened, and she left Yahweh. Yahweh then started to have sex with Lilith, the female aspect of Satan. And Shekhinah started to have sex with Samael, who is Jesus Christ, Messiah, son of Joseph. That is viewed as a catastrophe, which results in disorder in the universe. And the Israelites believe that they themselves, by having sex, start to recombine the androgyne, and therefore they encourage Yahweh and Shekhinah to reunite. But before Yahweh and Shekhinah can be reunited, the Amalekites, the non-Israelites, have to be exterminated. The king of Israel has to be anointed, and the temple has to be rebuilt. And that temple will be the bridal chamber in which Yahweh and Shekhinah will then reunite and become an androgynous Godhead. And the Kabbalists will then breed their 600,000 androgynous, immortal Judahites to rule the earth and be the sole inhabitants of the earth. And that's what the bridal chamber is all about.
Yikes. All right. So I'm going to ask my question now, Christopher.
I'm listening.
So
you're asking great questions. That's why I go on so long, because you keep asking these
it's a rabbit hole, right? So there's so much that we can pick at. So I like the idea of the homunculus serving a magical purpose. Now, I like and I subscribe to the idea that Jesus Christ was a homunculus, because why do you believe, and we can get into the Eucharist now, I believe, again, based on the Liber Vacae, where the homunculus is cannibalized in order to achieve certain magical powers, i.e. walk on water, see demons, speak to demons, drive somebody insane, grow whatever quickly, plant quickly, et cetera, you name it. It's a grimoire, and it gives you these ingredients and these recipes in order to do certain things with a homunculus. I believe that the reason that Jesus Christ was cannibalized was for the same reason, because he was a homunculus. He's cannibalized, i.e. the Eucharist, symbolically or quite literally at some points in time, right? Why do you believe that he is cannibalized? Other than the fact that he had to be given up in order for the second son, right? The second coming, the twin brother, whoever it was,
Messiah, son of David, to assimilate his soul.
To assimilate his soul, right? He was an offering. But why is he cannibalized? Why is it that this represents the body of Christ and this the blood? Why?
I have a very unexpected answer for you.
Let's go there.
And maybe we ought to share screens. Can you show the share screen?
You want me to bring it up now?
Please do.
All right, hold on. Oh, shoot. And I accidentally clicked out of this. Stream. All right. So sharing screen now. There you go. I accidentally hit the back key on my mouse.
In the book of Enoch and in the Apocalypse of Abraham, not Enoch, third Baruch, it states that the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is in fact a grapevine. And therefore the serpent was hung upon a grapevine, and the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that provided the gnosis, the knowledge to mankind, was a grape and was wine in effect. Wine is an intoxicating drink. Intoxication leads the mind into a state of chaos. So wine in Psalms and throughout the Old Testament is perceived as an evil force. When Noah replanted the vineyard after the earth had been cleansed, he brought the tree of the knowledge of good and evil back to the earth and restored the earth as Satan's kingdom and the kingdom of evil. Jesus Christ is that serpent on the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. His blood is that grape juice, that wine, which is offered to humanity as gnosis, as knowledge. Israelites shun that knowledge because it brings with it the curse of death. But it only brings with it the curse of death for so long as that fruit is unripe. Adam and Eve were cursed to death because they consumed the unripe fruit of knowledge. That knowledge is the same knowledge that Prometheus gave to humanity when he provided humanity with fire. That was the knowledge of the arts of civilization, agriculture, metallurgy, city building, etc. That was represented by Cain leaving the Garden of Eden and creating cities, and his descendant Tubal-Cain coming up with the idea of metallurgy. All those are knowledge, but they are unripe and they are used for evil purposes. Nuclear bombs are unripe knowledge. Biological weapons are unripe knowledge. They destroy the Garden of Eden. Cities destroyed the Garden of Eden. The earth was paved over with cities. Human beings were then cursed to toil and use the knowledge of agriculture to grow plants, and they became slaves of the land instead of the land serving them as a slave. to provide their sustenance. So Jesus is the Satan giving gnosis, which is where the term Gnostic comes from. His blood is the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but it is poisonous and brings with it the curse of death, which is why Christians were taught to ritually consume it and poison themselves. But as Paracelsus pointed out, the poison becomes the cure. And in the story of Moses, there is a brazen serpent called Nehushtan, which was also hung from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And he was the viper who becomes the cure for the poisonous bite of vipers. Now, Jesus, at the end of the 6,000 years, flips and becomes the advocate of the Israelites and mass murders all the Christians. At that point, the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil becomes ripened, and then it becomes kosher to consume. So the Israelites can then consume the knowledge which was developed by the Gentile world and utilize it to restore Adam back into an androgynous, immortal being, and to restore the earth into the Garden of Eden, where everything will be provided for them by science and technology, because the knowledge will finally have become ripened. But to the non-Israelite world, it remains the curse of death and the unripe fruit, which they consume as the bread and wine, the Eucharist, in order to poison them into extinction.
Yikes. So I've been lied to for almost my entire life.
Absolutely. For the last 2,000 years, the Roman Empire, initially the Europeans and the North Africans were lied to, and they were set up, and it was all a plan. And the plan is being fulfilled exactly on schedule. Jesus repeatedly said that this won't be fulfilled until the end of the age, and that age is the age of Pisces. Pisces represents two fish. Those two fish are the two Leviathans, the evil serpent and the good serpent.
Is this why these occultists were so obsessed with bringing forth these new ages? They wanted to usher it in as quick as possible because they wanted...
Absolutely, yes. And they believed that it was being delayed by the disobedience of the Israelites. And in the Talmud, it says that the world has to become entirely righteous or entirely wicked for all of this to be fulfilled. And they had a dilemma because there are supposedly 36 righteous men who keep the world in existence. So the world cannot become entirely wicked and still exist. And then on the other hand, the evil inclination will exist for as long as Esau's descendants exist. So the resolution of this dilemma to make the world entirely righteous was proposed by Isaac Luria and Lurian Kabbalah through the process of Tikkun Olam, rectification of the world, which is to remove the Kalipot from existence, to get rid of the shells of darkness and leave only the sparks of divine light.
Okay, wow. Oh, so I wanted to bring in here this quote that I have had for a long time. Well, not a quote, but in Sumerian, the word bar means temple. And we go to bars to consume wine and spirits, because you're talking about consuming the blood, the poisonous blood of your boy JC, and how it's the ultimate Faustian pact where, yes, you're going to have the gnosis, but at what cost? Is it
exactly? It is the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which was a grapevine.
Yeah, exactly. So it's, what are you willing to go? And
that's also related to the occultists, which you like to study in terms of the left-hand path and the right-hand path, and pursuing a reunion with the gods. Do you want to reunite with the most ancient gods of chaos, or do you want to reunite with the second-born gods of light?
Whoa. Okay. And so, all right, so there's a cosmic, so it's Star Wars. I mean, that's where George Lucas got it.
Exactly. Oh, absolutely.
It's the Sith and the Jedis.
That's it. That's what it's all about.
So because
there's also, among this dualism, there is this concept of the commingling, that the two serpents have to unite as one serpent. And that is when the knowledge becomes ripe.
But are they commingling together and creating reality? Is that what's going on?
Yes, and the reality will be the world to come.
Wow.
When in Kabbalistic terms, it is the ascent of the lower world to the upper world, as above, so below. The earth of Malkut will rise up to Yahweh's penis, through which is Yesod, the Messiah, son of Joseph, and then it will ascend to Yahweh's throne in Tiferet. And what it is like Jesus said, the expression of on earth as it is in heaven. When the two are combined, the duality of the one, it's a strange combination.
So they're trying to combine
dualism.
They're trying to combine correct me if I'm wrong from your point of view, are they trying to combine both worlds into one eventually?
Yes, absolutely. The heavenly temple and the earthly temple.
That's what transhumanism is all about.
Very much so.
I think
transhumanism is all about utilizing ripened knowledge to transform human beings back into what it was in the beginning, which was Adam, who was an androgynous, immortal being.
So this is what they want to do.
Adam was thought of as pure light initially, and the mythology of Adam being clothed represents Adam attaining flesh, which was the material world.
Which I think that's what the whole metaverse thing is, where they want to be able to eventually download our consciousness and get rid of what you were saying, just leave the divine spark, which I believe is consciousness, because that's the whole thing, that these lizard-esque reptilian people, they can't think for themselves. They have no creativity. They don't have that divine spark, right? The touch from whatever God it is that is up there, or whatever being it is at this point. But that's what I think they're trying to encapsulate, that whatever they can into a computer, or I don't know. I mean, but that's it reminds me of Tracy Twyman's work where with meat and Baphomet, and how it's the two pillars are being held up by this being, this hermaphroditic being that has the two pillars of existence, and it's holding it up.
The two pillars are its aspects, its male aspect, its female aspect, its aspect of severity, and its aspect of mercy. Mercy is obtained by scapegoating the non-Israelite world for the Israelites. That's what Yom Kippur is all about. But in terms of transhumanism, there's also this dualism. What you're talking about is imparting silicone and non-organic matter into the organic brains of non-Israelite human beings in order to drain them of their soul and to absorb all of that soul energy and then transfer it, so that you can't look at it as being a single thing. There's us and there's them. And from their perspective of us, they are going to utilize viewing themselves as gods who have gone beyond God, because God only was able to utilize the organic matter of chaos to create life and impart a soul. But they have gone a step further and utilized inorganic matter to create animate beings with a soul. So they view themselves as higher than God. And there are statements in the Talmud where they argue with God and win the argument. So they view themselves, again, as being able to create their own worlds and as being superior to the gods. And they will eliminate the gods in the world to come and replace them as their own gods, just as in the story of the Tower of Babel. They ascend to heaven and slay the gods, like ascending to Mount Olympus to slay Zeus and the other gods. That's what it's all about. But for them, they will utilize transhumanism to impart these computers in their brain, and to also utilize chimeric genetics to impart animal aspects to themselves, to make themselves superhuman, beyond human. But to the non-Israelite worlds, they will use it to make them descend further on the great chain of being towards chaotic matter, and enslave them and deprive them of their soul.
I think they've already achieved that, Christopher. I think
the cell phone did a hell of a lot to achieve that. And before that, it was the television.
Have you ever seen this image before?
I don't think so.
So apparently this is another version of Baphomet, where they call it meat, and it's holding up the sun and the moon, right? The pillars of existence. And it's got to do, I was obsessed with Baphomet for a while, and right, the Knights Templar. Do you have anything on the Knights Templar and what they were up to? Or were they the good guys, or were they the bad guys, or what's going on? Because I don't even know what to believe anymore.
I think the Crusades and the Knights Templar was about seizing Palestine for the benefit of the Israelites so that they could return and restore themselves. And at the same time, they persecuted people throughout Europe in order to force them to leave their lives in Europe and migrate to Palestine. And I think that's what that whole movement was about. In terms of the Templars and their gold and the Holy Grail and all of that, there are a lot of legends built up about it, and it's hard to determine what the facts are. But they admired John the Baptist, and they liked the Mandeans of Iraq. Yes,
which that was it was an Egyptian belief. If you had the head of a prophet, it would prophesize to you, right? So divination, you have necromancy, you have a whole bunch of different beliefs in there.
Well, that also relates to the serpent's curse of crushing the head of the serpent, which is decapitation. So John the Baptist was decapitating the enemies of Israel through the Golem, Jesus Christ.
Interesting.
And another thing I wanted to mention was that John the Baptist baptized through water, but Jesus baptized through the Holy Spirit, which is a distinction. And the Holy Spirit in Christianity actually represents the succubus Lilith, who imparts demonic embryos into human females. And that's what Jesus Christ was in the story. Was the succubus Lilith, who is the screech owl of Isaiah chapter 34, verse 14, is the female aspect of Satan. And in the oral tradition of Judaism, one of the things that she always did was to impart demonic fetuses into human females and then murder their naturally created human children so that the mothers would be focused on raising the demons and not waste any of their energy raising their own children. And that is a repetition of the story of Cain's birth, because it was Lilith who appeared before Eve and seduced her and fornicated with her and put in the fetus of Cain into Eve. So it's a repetition of the story of Eve fornicating with the serpent. Jesus Christ's birth, virgin birth, is a repetition of that.
Yikes. Yeah, my grandma would be proud right now if she heard me talking about this. So,
well, this is not my beliefs. This was pointed out by Isaac Luria to Chaim Vital, who recorded the notion that Jesus is the reincarnation of Esau, who was the reincarnation of Cain. And that appears in the 67th chapter of Shar HaGagulim, Gate of Reincarnations, chapter 67.
I like shout out to Alex Rivera. He said one time on a show that Kabbalah is the tool that they used, and I'm paraphrasing, a tool that they used to decipher this matrix, to decipher this reality. And how
it's a tool to decipher the written law. And that written law is the matrix, in that the Torah is composed of the 600,000 letters of 600,000 souls of the Israelites, and it is the map of creation. That's a very common theme in Kabbalah.
Interesting. So you think that eventually with transhumanism, they will achieve their goal of getting rid of the husks and the empty shells that you were talking about, and powering their bringing to fruition their new Messiah, or what's going to happen? What happens
that's
after?
Their plan. I don't know if it's going to happen, but that's their plan, and they have developed all of the technologies to do it. They developed the nuclear bombs that become the unripe poisonous fruit that pits us against one another. I believe they created both Christianity and Islam. Christianity represents the Leviathan. Islam is stated to be the behemoth. In the book of Job, it talks about the Leviathan and the behemoth. And there were medieval texts in which it was said that Islam was created in order to be the behemoth that would battle with the Leviathan. In other words, Christendom and Islam would fight each other and mutually consume each other. And then their flesh would be given a great feast at the end of time when the world to come had arrived. And that is Jesus's wedding banquet, where Jesus's flesh is consumed as the ripened fruit, as the Leviathan's flesh. And then his skin is the coat, Joseph's coat of many colors, which is the stars of the Ouroboros rotating around the earth, and that will illuminate Jerusalem. They will skin Jesus and utilize his skins to illuminate Jerusalem, in effect creating phosphorescent gems in the walls of Jerusalem to illuminate it.
Wow. Okay,
and that's found in Bava Batra, folio 74B, I believe, 74A or 74B.
They sound like great people, Christopher. They sound like they're really, really...
They have been horrible to humanity, and they have been most horrible to the Jewish people themselves, which is something that I hope I can awaken people to. And that this not become an anti-Jewish movement, but as a movement to save all of us together. Because very, very few Jewish people have ever been let in on all of these secrets. But there are rabbis, top rabbis, who are repeating what I'm saying as if they had thought of it. Because now that I have revealed it, they are free to speak about it publicly. And no one has been able to refute what I've been saying. And it's been out for years now.
Yeah, very interesting. So you say that, other than informing ourselves and educating ourselves, is there anything else that we can do? Obviously, we're podcasting now about it, spreading awareness. And I've always said that this whole reality that is implanted in us, right, since a very young age, I believe that we all emanate our realities. And when you put some ideas, how you mentioned earlier about Christianity, hating this realm, you hate it because the idea that there is a more divine, I remember as a kid, they told me, we're going to have a mansion made of gold.
That's the world to come of Christianity, the kingdom of heaven. It's a heavenly kingdom. It's not an earthly kingdom, and it has a heavenly temple. And again, they have this idea of ascent to the heavenly kingdom. Mm-hmm. But in Judaism, that ascent takes place on the earth, and maintaining yourselves alive and having children. But in the Christian mythology, especially in the Gnostic, the first Gnostic Christian mythology, it was obtained by freeing the soul from the corpse of flesh and ascending to heaven that way. So it was suicidal and genocidal.
Interesting. So the quote unquote bad guys that want to get rid of the other group made that up, and they made them believe it all this time. I mean, because I've always said that as a Christian, you're preparing for the afterlife, and you don't take it. But why did they
view life as death and death as if life? It's completely irrational. And they view sex, the procreation, the beautiful creation of your children, which keeps your DNA in existence, as if it's an evil act of original sin.
Why did the Egyptians want to maintain their bodies, right? Why did they prep their bodies for when they died? Did they have a belief that they could come and inhabit that body again after the fact, or what's going on there? Because they were also about the afterlife. After they die, they would be buried with their gold so they can take their gold into the afterlife and whatever it was. But why'd they leave their body? Why would they prep their body after the fact?
Because they believed that there was a journey that would take place after you died, and you needed your body and your slaves and your accoutrement. You needed food, you needed your preserved heart and these other things in the afterlife so that you could go through this journey. And they would inscribe on the walls of the tombs of the mummies the lessons that they would need to make it through this journey. And in the Orphic mythologies and in the Greek mystery religions, they had what was called a bronze tablet that became a golden tablet that also had these instructions inscribed on them. And they talked about the idea you would go down a river and then you would have to turn right and all of these things. And you would pass through several gods on your journey across the planets. And this is also in the Mithraic mythologies and was picked up by Islam and by Kabbalah and by the Merkava of the chariot, that you would have to take this journey where your soul ascended across these 7 planets, and each planet would have a gate, and you would have to know the passwords to give to the demons and the angels to make it through these gates. And that all relates to this original Egyptian conception of a journey to the world of the afterlife. And the Egyptians believed you would have your own body preserved, that you would re-enter and make this journey. The Kabbalists and the Greeks believed that you would actually be freed of your body, but that you would need to have the gnosis, the knowledge, the passwords to give to the demons, and you would have to know the proper path to follow, especially when you reach the great abyss and the dark night of the soul. You would have to have all of this knowledge. And in Kabbalah, there is an 11th Sephirot known as Deat, which means knowledge. So you would have to have all of this knowledge for your soul to be able to make it across the great abyss into the divine realm.
Have you been there by any chance, Christopher? Have you visited these places before?
Yes, I visited, and I have returned to save humanity from the evil forces.
Wow. Yeah, this is really crazy. And
one of the things we have to do is not fall into hate, because hate is what they utilize to pit us against one another and divide us into these 2 opposing forces of the Leviathan and the Behemoth, so that we consume one another. War and disease and political strife and social unrest all work in their favor. So what we ought to be doing is encouraging our fellow citizens, both in our nation and of the earth, to work together and face the challenges that we face in non-destructive and mutually beneficial ways. And that's the best way to fight our enemies. The other thing is to shine a spotlight on them and what their agenda is, so that we can understand why they are imposing these 10 plagues of the apocalyptic era upon us, what their belief system is. And we have to be very wary of how they are ripening the fruit of knowledge to become poisonous to us, until the point where it becomes salvational for them in terms of exterminating us. And we have to be very wary of how technology is being utilized by the pharmacological things, the way that androgyny is being pushed in academia and the media to make us non-procreative, and to encourage the idea of creating human beings in vitro like homunculi. And all of these things are engineered to exterminate us and to deprive us of our human souls and our human nature. Yes,
and I agree. I don't care if, what sexuality you are, but it's part of the agenda where they want to. Again, it's eugenics. It's genocide. Where if you,
it's actually dysgenics for one side, and what they conceive of as eugenics for them.
Dysgenics is called.
Yes, dysgenics, breeding stupider, less apt to survive human beings. And they always said that one part of the agenda to reduce the human population would be to promote homosexuality and to promote androgyny. And I have nothing against homosexuals at all. This is also detrimental to them, because it is making something out of them which is not their nature.
Yeah, the scapegoats.
They become the scapegoats, or they become the symbol to be emulated as normal. And it's not either one traditionally among human beings. And they're simply being used. Many of them are very good people, and they're being used as a weapon. just as everybody's being used as a weapon. So I'm not speaking out against them. I'm speaking out against the agenda, which is taking advantage of them and weaponizing them to attack humanity in general.
Yeah. And again, this is why nothing against anybody. I love everyone equally, but there are some things that they do push more than others, and how you're saying. I didn't know this term, dysgenics, but now I do. And it goes back to Pythagoras. Allegedly, Pythagoras was the one that came up with the whole eugenics thing. And I didn't know that Plato's Republic was supposedly finished after Plato had acquired some of Pythagoras' burned works after the fact. So, there's some Pythagorean, if you want to believe that he was a real person, Pythagorean influence in the works of Plato, which Plato paved the way for the Gnostics and Christianity and Catholicism and all these other world religions that we know of today, because it started with these people. And that's what a lot of people don't understand, that it starts somewhere and they got their influence from somebody even earlier than that. So that's why I believe that religion will eventually change. And I think it's going to get to a point to where there's going to be a tipping point, and who knows if we're going to be worshiping some electronic Cthulhu or something at the end of the day. I'm not 100%.
Plato was very heavily influenced by Pythagoras. He was also influenced by the Mithraic, the Zoroastrian type dualism, and he was heavily influenced by the Eleatic philosophers, Parmenides and Zeno. And that's where the conception of the one, which is in the Shema of Judaism, that God is one, and that everything, when it is perfect, is one. And that the Platonic conception of the ideal forms relates very strongly to those conceptions of Parmenides, that being and becoming are distinct, and that becoming is an illusion of what is ideal being. I don't think Pythagoras had any of that. I think it came from Parmenides.
Wait, can you repeat that again slower? Because that's really nice. I like that.
That there is this distinction from ideal being and what humans perceive as an illusion of becoming that ideal. And that our minds don't have the beautiful, perfect forms of the first intellect. We therefore perceive thousands of guitars, but there is only one ideal form of the guitar. And that ultimately everything resolves into the unity of the monad, of the one, which is timeless, and that everything coexists in that ideal world. But we live in an illusionary world, like the simile of the cave, in which we are in the process of becoming that ideal. And that's why we are reincarnated over and over again, according to Plato, in a very similar system to the Hindus, where we are given the opportunity to rectify our souls and improve our souls, so that we, through this process of becoming, become ideal being, which is timeless and eternal and spaceless.
I also like what Plato says about that we know all the knowledge. We're just remembering it all over again, right? Like everything that there ever was to learn, we already know it. We're just, when you learn something, you're just remembering it from this, how you're saying, this next level, this upper dimension, the Akashic records, the upper eons, whatever you want in heaven, whatever you want to name it.
True being, absolute being, perfect being. I have a similar philosophy in terms of the notion that premonition is identical to memory. And in a sense, we remember the future by having premonitions about the future. And that memories themselves are actually physical constructs within the cerebellum and cerebrum of the brain that creates a database upon which our higher mind generates consciousness. And that there are three, I call them databases of past, present, and future that actually have nothing to do with time. They are simply part of the construct of the brain in the present, in this world in which we exist, which changes from moment to moment. but that our brains cause us to act, and that action is part of the structure of the universe, which forms this web that we perceive as a chain of events, because we have these images in our consciousness of past, present, and future, all of which exist in the present, but that the present never disappears, that the future already exists, and that our consciousness travels from each of these individual frames in each individual moment with the perception that it is the same consciousness in the same world traveling through identical matter which is being rearranged. I don't think that matter is permanent or energy is permanent in the sense that it changes and the past disappears and it rearranges into something new. I think that every moment is composed of its own unique matter and energy, all of which coexist forever, all of which has always existed, and all of which will always exist. And therefore, what we perceive through these databases of memory, which is always inaccurate, our understanding of the present, which is always inaccurate, and our under expectation of the future, which is always inaccurate, is simply part of the construct of our brain that forms part of the construct of the overall universe, which is composed of all of these individual worlds of moments. And that we are constructed in this manner so that these worlds are integrated together. And we are blessed to have a perception of that through the fact that our consciousness is composed of these images of past, present, and future. But it is always ultimately only present. And that present constitutes its own individual world of matter, form, and energy. And that it is not these worlds transmuting into one another. Instead, all of these worlds coexist forever.
Whoa, that's like what Alan Watts when he says the it's only the eternal now. That's all that's ever existing, because you're always in the now, but they've would you say that they've indoctrinated us to want to remember the past and all this stuff, or
they want to shape how we remember the past, and they want to shape our perceptions of the present and our expectations of the future.
So magic.
And that is often done maliciously to control us as if we were robotic slaves. So what they are doing is creating the database that our soul, our higher mind, draws upon to form the image that we perceive as our inner voice and consciousness. So they have enslaved us by controlling the data of our memories, the data of our sense perceptions, and how we interpret those sense perceptions and our expectations of the future. And they do it mostly with lies, which is one of the things that I resent so strongly about Christianity, is that it lies to us about our past. Why is it that Europeans have abandoned all of their ancestors in favor of worshiping mythical figures of Israelites who never existed? Why is it that American Indian Christians do the same, or Chinese Christians, or African Christians? They give up all of the past, which ought to form their ancestral memories, to this mythology religion, which is built of lies. And that makes it impossible for their soul, or their higher mind, as I call it, to formulate consciousness in a survivable way. Whereas if they had maintained the traditions of their ancestors who survived for hundreds of thousands of years prior to Christianity, then their consciousness would have something which was proven to perpetuate the survival of their being through their children into the future. So that their DNA, which is their immortality, which is the unifying being that goes through this transmutation of worlds into the various events that we perceive as time, will make that line of our lives as long as possible, instead of cutting it short. And the Greeks had a very similar conception with the three fates, the three women who would weave the thread of our lives, measure it out, and cut it, and determine what our destiny is. And I think a big part of that thread is our consciousness, the decisions we make, the actions we take, whether we love ourselves or hate ourselves, whether our children are dear to us or we view them as the abomination of trapping a soul in the material world. Christianity is a trap that was imposed upon us to manipulate our consciousness to view ourselves as inherently evil and to resent the creation of children and to seek to achieve salvation through our own self-extermination.
Wow. I couldn't have put it better myself, Christopher. So yeah, this is really heavy, and this is gonna, again, I've talked about a lot of blasphemous and heretical things on my show before, but I don't think I've ever actually been there in this way. And I think you really put it in a coherent way. So
maybe you can host a debate sometime with somebody on the opposing side, and we can sort out the facts. And that will help people to better understand.
Yeah.
But Christians should be warned that the Jews always view Jesus Christ as the devil. In the New Testament, in John, and throughout the Gospels, they refer to him as Beelzebub and as the devil, and they always shunned him. The Gnostics openly acknowledge the fact that Jesus is the devil, and the Kabbalists openly state that Jesus is the devil. So the very people who originated Christianity have consistently always identified Jesus as the devil. And as you pointed out, the Gospel of Judas reveals the fact that Christianity is a trap, which is meant to exterminate the children of Esau, and these are the terms that the book itself uses, in order for the children of Jacob to obtain immortality on the backs of exterminating Esau and absorbing his soul, is how the Kabbalah later explained it. But I think it was always encrypted in the language of Gnosticism and Christianity, that Jesus will return as the Antichrist, issue the final judgment, and the final judgment will be for only Israelites to inhabit the earth and all Christians to be exterminated either through the rapture or through their mutually consuming wars and be elevated to the kingdom of hell, which is actually the kingdom of hell. Elevated to the kingdom of heaven, which is actually the kingdom of hell. This whole idea of the afterlife as framed by the Christians mirrored the kingdom of Hades of the Greeks.
Interesting. Yeah, I've been there. So not there, but I've been in that position where this has been put in my mind, and I was in church for a very long time. So again,
we have Christians in America and in Russia welcoming the idea that we engage in a mutually destructive nuclear war against each other that annihilates humanity. This was always the plan. This was planned 2,500 years ago. Yeah. It's in the book of Isaiah. It's in the book of Ezekiel, the war of Gog and Magog, et cetera, et cetera. And it was even the plan with the serpent's curse, where he will strike your heel and he will crush your head. That's what's going on.
Wow. Any closing thoughts, Christopher, that you want to add before we head out of here?
Well, maybe we can do another show at some point directly on the Golem and the homunculi, and we can exchange ideas, and I can present all my slides and we can chew them over. I want to thank you very much. I think this has been one of the most productive exchanges I've had, and I think you're a true gentleman and a scholar. I can sense your love of knowledge and your pursuit of knowledge and your enthusiasm about sharing your knowledge with others. It really comes through. You have a great intellect, and I see great things for you in the future.
Thank you, Christopher. I appreciate all your kind words, and I appreciate you coming on. And it was funny because Mark had hit me up, and he told me I should have you on when I had listened to the episode that you did with him. I was like, I don't know if I can keep up with this guy, because this guy is black belt level stuff. And I tried my best today, but yeah, we will definitely do it again. And we didn't even cover some of the stuff that we had talked about that we were going to cover, but I will actually, for the next one, read some of your books, or try to get because you sent me a few of them. So I'll take a look at those, and yeah, we'll definitely do this again very soon in the near future.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christopher. I appreciate you. Do you want to plug your stuff real quick before we go for my listeners where they can find you?
Yes, all of this is documented with vetable, verifiable facts, and you can find those facts in my books, which you will find at cjbbooks.com.
Awesome. And I'll post the link in my show notes for that. And you can find me at the 101 Podcast on all social media platforms, the101podcast.com. And you can find the Occultus Mundi journal on there. And I have Patreon, patreon.com/the101podcast. Exclusive episodes on there, early access, a whole bunch of good stuff. And I appreciate you for coming on, Chris, on my show, and for having me on yours, and for reaching out. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it very much too. And I'm so glad that we got connected, because you're a true intellectual who is not afraid to pursue the facts wherever they lead in a rational way. And that's a rare individual these days.
Absolutely. As long as my whole thing is, as long as you can back it up with something, not just spew bullshit out. And if you could bring up the hey, this is what this says, that's the way I see it. And the truth isn't always going to be a comfortable thing. It's gonna, the truth will set you free. It's not gonna, it's not here to caress you and cuddle you. It's here to set you free. I mean, and everyone has their own journey.
It enables your consciousness to perpetuate itself in a survivable way if you have good facts about the past, present, and future. That's the way nature has engineered the human being to survive, is to rely upon better and better understandings of what the world is.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Christopher. We'll do this again very soon.
Thank you, Juan.